What I'm going to do is, as usual, I'm going to talk about what Chris said, but I'm going to focus on the whole talent issue, the whole talent agenda, and the way that's changing in the world generally and in the world of work in particular, and just how universities fit into that mix. So I'm very happy. It's not the world's most interactive forum, but if you've got a point or you want to disagree with me, as long as there's no physical violence, so that you can challenge me all you want. So you can just simply interrupt, just put your hand up, and I don't mind stopping mid-sentence. I'm really very happy with that. So I know it's very difficult to do that, but if you really have got a point, don't think you have to wait to the end, although we'll leave time for questions. How long have we got, Chris? It's now about 2:10.
Hour and 5 minutes.
Is that okay with everyone? Right, I just want to play you a video first. It is the BBC after all.
As a daytime team, we put all our ideas for all the teams, for all the shows, into one central app. We sat in a meeting room for what seemed like forever, and we literally listed all the ideas, and we talked about the ideas and how we thought people would be affected by them. You know, we thought about how much people enjoy it, how much people would interact with things. And almost like a sliding scale, this one needs loads of interaction. This one needs real audience participation. This one is something that will go at a much quieter time of day. And that was all fed back to the execs. And then amongst them as a team, they kind of redistributed the features. So you didn't necessarily end up with your own features, but they were redistributed to a point where they would maximise what they needed. If they needed a point in the day when there was plenty of music and it was just something, much more information, you know, let's talk about what the station's got going on. Let's do it in this point here when the audience it's there in high numbers, but it's an audience that are going to listen, as opposed to an audience at drive time who are going to want prizes and they're going to want to interact and they're going to want to tell their joke or whatever.
That's Sunil, and I've used that clip more times than I'd be embarrassed to tell Sunil that we did that. But I just want to reflect a little bit about that clip. If you look, Sunil works for BBC Radio 1 Extra, which in itself was a radical departure from Radio 1. And what we're finding increasingly is that the kind of culture of Radio 1 Extra is beginning to take over the culture of Radio 1 rather than the other way around. And although it was a very small, it's a black music station, and the idea was to get at ethnic youth which were not listening to Radio 1, and it was part of a big change agenda. But what Sunil says is incredibly radical in ways that you won't understand, because it seems quite logical to you. But in the BBC terms, what he's saying is, hey, we have lots of ideas. That's radical. Number one, radical. Lots of ideas. Two, we debate those as a team. We generate them together. That's radical. Three, we don't hoard our own ideas. We distribute the ideas according to who really should best own those ideas. So if that's a drive time idea, we give it to the drive time team. If that's an evening idea, we give it to the evening team. If it's an early morning idea, whatever. So that they separate the ideas and they work on them in their specific teams. So there are kind of 4 or 5 trays which make Sunil very important and indicative of the way all media are going. 1, he's young and full of ideas. 2, he's quite happy to work in a team. 3, he doesn't come from a traditional BBC background, although we parody when we say traditional BBC background, because that sort of, the imaginary background of kind of Oxbridge straight in has really died maybe 10, 15 years ago. It's still there, but it's residual rather than dominant now. He doesn't come from a traditional background. And he's working in a part of the organisation which is breaking new ground, not on a daily basis, not on a monthly or annual basis, but on a daily basis also. And Radio 1 Extra, a digital music station, quickly got an audience of about 250,000, and it's kind of sustained that, built it up a little bit. But in terms of digital, BBC digital radio output, it's done fantastically well, and it's sustained that. And it was the first to, apart from Radio 4 and The Archers, to really break through on downloading and podcasts. So there were certain shows that thousands and tens of thousands of people would download to listen in their car. They burn a CD, they listen on iPods and so on. So Radio 1 Extra kind of went with the flow, and is a really interesting, still innovative part of the BBC. But if we're talking about talent and where we get talent, what talent is, and how you can help us, just reflect on young Sunil for me for a second, and just keep him somewhere in the back of your head, because he's a lot about the future of any media organisation, and possibly any organisation in the world. And there are a few things that will never happen to Sunil that certainly happened to me in my life. One, he will probably never have an office. Two, he will probably never work in an environment where he sees his future stretching out into decades or at least big chunks of years. And three, he'll never work in a world where it's pretty much the same this year as next year and, hey, just hang in there, Sunil, and you'll get your pension when you're 65 or 62 or probably by the time he's ready for pension, 112. So he comes through an atypical world, but I think he's more and more closely reflecting reality than many of us, and maybe some of us, in this room. And the second point I want to make is that when someone goes to work, in whatever guise, they enter an organisation, and organisations drive you totally crazy as much as they love you or you love them. And there is not a person who has worked for more than a few months who hasn't loathed and detested the place that employs them, and also felt deeply in love with the place that employs them. And sometimes that switch happens in 15 minutes. It doesn't take much, as you all know. So organisations drive us mad. They're complex beasts, and the bigger the organisation, the more complex. And we give hardly any attempt to help people in that massive culture shock, which is going to work and earning your living and realising that the world isn't as you might have imagined it, or the theory doesn't quite match the practice. So hold that in your mind as well. And Radio 1 Extra really took a culture and smashed it apart. And they were allowed to do it because they were a new, innovative black music station in the heart of kind of establishment Radio 1. But many other individuals going into organisations don't have that luxury, and therefore they have to adjust to culture, and they find it incredibly hard, and it doesn't always work for them. And still, large numbers of organisations, you can't see Jane Tennyson. I would like to write a book on managing people and Prime Suspect. I think there's something there. This is a quote by her boss. This is the last Prime Suspect. Which one was it? 7, 6? 7, sorry. Prime Suspect 7. This is when she's kind of on the alcohol a bit and they're trying to get her out, and she solves the last great case that they all think she's incapable of doing. And she comes in for an interview with her line manager, essentially. She walks out the door. The line manager turns to someone on the same level as her and says, on the force of what, 30, 35 years, washed up, burnt out, and all they can do when they leave is drink themselves to death. Great, great personnel management, great leadership. And also, the most extraordinary thing is that the knowledge that Jane has in her head, she's been on the force 30, 35 years, she knows quite a lot. All of that knowledge is kind of thrown out in 3 seconds with she's nearly an alcoholic. We don't even need to take account of anything she says or does. So, you're also bringing people into environments which not only can be sometimes frustrating, they can be toxic. And there are many places that people work where the employing environment is toxic rather than life-enhancing. And I think that very few people have any kind of preparation for the shock of moving into an environment which is not creative and innovative or free-thinking, and where you can be treated very, very badly. So there are some sort of, I'm just putting stuff in the background, really. These are just points that I'll come back to. But it's all about adjusting from one world into another world, and most people get very little preparation. Now, I got none. Is there anyone else who got anything better than me? Probably not, I would think. And yet, organisations, hey, they're half our life, maybe a third of our life. They're very important to us. So there are some big issues about talent, but I'm going to come on to that in a second. But I want to just share with you my elephant. Can you see that? Did anyone see that elephant? You did? Oh, well done, John. The elephant was in London. Have you seen that picture before? Have I talked about it before? When you? Yeah. A bit, yeah. Okay, has anyone else heard about my elephant? I do get obsessed with things. I got slightly obsessed with this elephant.